Hey friends, this is Caleb, and you're listening to the ecoChristian podcast. We're here exploring what it means to be Christian on planet Earth. And today, y'all, this episode pulls few punches because I just had the opportunity to sit down with three wonderful women who are doing some kingdom work in Kansas City. We get into equity, schools, landfills, trees, redlining, sewage, and our children. So hold on, here we go. I'm with a few special people here today that I'm really excited for you guys to meet and to hear from. And so without further ado, I want to introduce you guys to a few people who are doing some really magnificent work in Kansas City, Kansas. And they're part of Groundwork Northeast Revitalization Group. And with me, and I'll let you guys just sort of say a hello here because there's four of us in the room, but I'm with Miss Elnora Jefferson, who is one of the founders of Groundwork. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Then hello to you, Caleb, and to everyone who's listening.
Wonderful. Also with us is Reverend Stacy Evans, who's part of the project and also a pastor in the AME church. Welcome.
Good morning or good afternoon.
That's right.
I'm glad to be here.
Wonderful. You're also chilling on your back porch like I am right now. So we're just talking how we might have a few birds land in the podcast, which will be an exciting situation. And also with us is Adri Showalter Matlock, who is the operations director at Groundwork. So how are you today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having us on.
Yes. I'm so glad that we got to connect on this, and I think maybe it originally happened over Instagram or something, but I was like, yes, we need to, people need to hear about this work. And so I'm excited to connect some dots, hopefully in this conversation around what it means to be a people of a place, doing the kind of kingdom work. So I'm going to give a brief summary as much as possible that I'm sure we'll need some corrections made to it. And then we'll just jump in because I want to hear about what you guys are up to. So Groundwork Northeast Revitalization Group, you kind of go by Groundwork NRG, right? So you guys it's a Black-led organization founded by neighborhood leaders over 10 years ago in a specific area called Northeast Kansas City. And this area was once a place where the Wyandotte tribe operated, a stop on the Underground Railroad, and welcomed people freeing themselves from slavery, which is just, wow. And then in the early to mid 1900s, the community was a thriving, predominantly Black community built by those self-liberated folks as well as those who relocated to Kansas because of what's now called Northeast KCK, Kansas City, was a welcoming place. And so racially discriminatory practices like redlining, the war on drugs, white flight, and so on eventually undermine the community. And so now it looks a bit different. And so Groundwork NRG works with neighbors to advocate to the local government for equitable distribution of resources, especially for infrastructure improvements like better sewers, parks, tree canopy, soil contamination. So you've got quite a litany of programs and things that you're up to. And I wanted to share your mission statement as well, which says Groundwork NRG's local mission is to sustain and revitalize our beloved Northeast KCK community through forward-looking and inclusive action rooted in the principles of equity, community cohesion, institutional transparency, and environmental justice. Man, that's just like, I'm going to drop this microphone. I love that mission statement. So that's really great. So lots we could talk about. But Miss Elnora, maybe I'd love to start with you. as you're sort of one of the original founders of this work, maybe you could give us a brief summary of what that was like starting this work. How did this kind of come about for you?
Okay, thank you very much. Well, succinctly, it came about because the Northeast Kansas City, Kansas, the area, our service area, if you will, has, for a number of reasons and over time, been an area that has been less, less revitalized, less resources, a lot of trauma that's happened there. Anywhere from, just a lot of trauma. Redlining, urban renewal are the things that we hear mostly. But we do also in that area have a history, as you mentioned there at the Quindaro Ruins, of the Native Americans and the trauma that they experience as well. So historically, for a couple hundred years, that's the way that the Northeast has been. Well, currently, then up to, say, like 15, 20 years ago, the neighborhood presidents decided that what we wanted to do was to form an organization that could best serve the interests of the various neighborhood groups. At that time, there were 13 in the Northeast, which was kind of downsized from what it used to be. There were as many as 20 before, when the area was really heavily populated. And we felt that if we had an organization such as Groundwork NRG, whose name that preceded it was the Historic Northeast Midtown Association. The acronym was HNMA, that we would have a better chance of coming together to advocate for the things that we felt were good things to have for our quality of life and for our neighborhoods. So that's how we started. And we did it on our own. We did it without any attorneys and with other kind of professionals. We filled out our own forms, RS forms, and that's how we got started.
Hey, wow. And what year was that? How long ago was that?
It was in 2011. We started really in the fall of 2011, just coming together to test each other's desire. We called ourselves the President's Group at that time. And then in the winter of or early part of 2012, we started formalizing it, or we received our 501c3 designation in 2012 as well. And then we went before the commission at the Unified Government of Kansas City, Kansas, as the local political organization, and received a unanimous vote from the commissioners, the 10 commissioners that were on board. So,
wow,
since 2020.
That's cool. Was there any doubt in any of the work at that point, or did it feel like, the fire in everyone's belly kind of thing? Did it feel that it was just kind of like something beyond yourselves bringing this together?
No, it wasn't beyond it. We didn't feel like that.
Yeah.
We just knew the complexities of organizing in an area that has been traumatized as much as the Northeast has. That there remains many complexities. There are different levels of things. It's like the fingers, on the hand. It all has to work together. Yet each digit itself has a unique function. And so, but no, there was never any doubt because we were older. And so, well, maybe, like young people, there's no doubt they love that fire. And I guess as older people, we had fire too.
Yeah. You're just ready to rock and roll. You're like, yeah, let's just do this thing at this point. I love that. So, Adri, you mentioned that sort of, and whoever could speak to this, but that in 2020, there was sort of a shift and you joined a sort of a national network of environmental justice organizations. And since then, Groundwork has woven environmental justice into more of the work that you do. You quote, are a multifaceted organization because you can't achieve environmental justice without also addressing all the interrelated building blocks of a community. So we intertwine housing, food, and utility sovereignty into our environmental justice work and fight for community control over these things, end quote. So I'd love to hear about that transition or awakening, or however you want to say that, to for the environmental aspect of your work that was also occurring, and maybe what happened there. And maybe can you share how earth care and environmental justice is sort of interconnected for your work?
So the work of environmental justice has always been part and parcel of the work that the founders of our organization did and advocated for. There's different things in our community that have just gone hand in hand with the discriminatory policies that we talked about that affect the environment and are always at the forefront, whether or not it's being labeled as environmental justice. So there's a park in Northeast KCK that was built on a landfill that was proven to not have been created safely as was originally claimed. The Quindaro townsite was also going to be made into a landfill at one point, and it took community advocacy to prevent that from happening. And the lack of, adequate parks, infrastructure, the lack of an adequate tree canopy in Northeast KCK, and those kinds of things that just come with equitable development have always been part and parcel of the work that the organization has done. So I think when we decided as an organization to join the Groundwork USA network, it was sort of putting a label on and creating a more deliberate focus on environmental justice, building on the work that had already been happening. And so that, partly just grew out of the reality that we are all more and more familiar with every day of the effects of climate change on our community, on all of us. And so when we learned about Groundwork USA, there was just a lot of value alignment and that sort of capacity building to expand our environmental justice focus.
Great. Maybe we could, I'd love to just pause here for a minute. I think that there's a good chance that we're sort of throwing out some things that may be kind of a new thought for some people. So I'd love to sort of just crack open another layer here, and I'd love if one of you could talk us through a little bit more about what you mean, about what that looks like practically. I think there's a lot of folks out there who maybe haven't witnessed or lived in a place with this kind of history. Talk us through that sort of, I don't know if we want to go all the way down into redlining, but we can, but why are we talking about tree canopies? Why are we talking about this disparity? How are these things connected, and how do we get here? Does that make sense? I'm trying to decide how many layers down we want to go, but I want to make sure that our listeners are catching what this work is really about that you guys are up to.
Reverend Stacy, do you want to start?
I was actually trying to be quiet because you and Miss Elnora have so much more history about it, but I was just thinking, it seemed you were struggling with the words there. Working with the young people like I do with Groundwork. And then you were talking about the fire in the belly earlier. There's always a point in an African American's life where you are confirmed that what you thought was going on is really going on. Because, we're raised to be patriotic. We're raised to, especially as Christians, to love one another like we love ourselves. But you feel these inequities your entire life. In school, when you play sports and you go to schools in the suburbs and other places, and you see what you don't have. When you travel to different neighborhoods and you see the houses, you see the trees and the bushes and the lakes and the rivers, and you go back to your community, then you know what you don't have. And so there's this time in life where it is confirmed for you, absolutely, that you've been treated unfairly and inequitably. And so what we're talking about is trying to level the playing field for these people on some very basic levels like air, water, and safety. So when you felt unsafe a lot of your life, and then you get to a certain age in a place where these things are confirmed for you, it does create a fire in your belly, as we said earlier. You want to fight. You want to change things, not just for yourself, but for your children and your children's children. And then you have to just deal with all of this whole mentally, physically, emotional feelings that you got going on. Does my country that I love so much, my community, my local government, are they really dumping these kinds of chemicals and trash in my area? And if so, this has got to stop. And I do think that there are people who don't really realize. I once heard in a film, Malcolm X said that power only backs up in the face of more power. Then I know for a fact that even the tiniest of person, a little baby, will take advantage of you if you let them. And so I think who would volunteer to have chemicals dumped in their neighborhood, especially if you have the power? But that doesn't make it right that you can dump it in our neighborhoods because we're poor or because we're Black or Latino or women or whatever. So that's what we're talking about. We're talking about bold-faced inequities that have been lying under the surface, hiding and pretending that they're not there when they really are.
Yeah. Wow. You put that really well. And I'd definitely be curious, Miss Elnora, what you'd add on there or share as well.
Well, I too want to give a shout out and appreciation to Pastor Evans for delving into that subject and laying the carpet, if you will, the foundation. I think it's a great foundation for this discussion. Because as she was talking, I could relate to that. I could relate to traveling south or traveling in Kansas City to the suburbs or whatever, and just everything just seems to go a little bit better. The air seems to be better. The streets seem to be better. There's certainly a lot more resources. The lights seem to be better. Everything just seems to be better. And yes. So a lot of the work we're doing is trying to and advocating for the betterment to bring back what we used to have prior to even things like the civil rights movement. You know, the laws in the civil rights movement that allowed people to migrate out of that segregated area, so that one was able to go to different schools and one was able to live at different places and one was able to work at the corporate level and not just at the schools. Though we had great education when that was there. And so as I was listening to Pastor Evans, that's that struggle. But then along with that as well is encouraging, motivating people to see themselves as deserving of more than what exists. To see themselves as deserving more than what exists. Number one. And then number two, for my perspective, is not only deserving what's more, but saying it is a right that we have more. And to have the courage and have the stamina to fight and to expect more. There's no shortage of examples of things, not only when Pastor Evans was talking about, and Adrienne as well, the landfills and the trash and dumping. But the thing is, just as you wouldn't even believe, just the destruction of the schools. In my neighborhood, the destruction of the local schools. They were fine schools. In fact, if I listen to the historian, our local neighborhood historian, says that the schools have been renovated. They were fine structures. But for some reason, one would wonder to know what that reason could possibly be. The schools were raised. And when the schools were raised, it forced the kids to go to busing. And then also kept people from moving in and buying homes and raising the tax values and so forth. It just seems to have been a legacy of devaluing certain ethnic groups in the Northeast. And that's a powerful thing when we think about that. Yeah, the legacy of that. So, yeah, it makes one skeptical and suspicious about if we're uncovering these kinds of things. How far does it go? How far will people go to keep? Because I work with kids, African American children, Latino children, urban children, from being, who they were born to be.
Yeah. Wow. That that's some work. And I can imagine that probably, especially early on or at different points, it feels very gargantuan and possibly even overwhelming at points when you think about, because part of the work is obviously not just the work itself, but it's sort of the work behind the work, which is the raising awareness, the bringing into the light of these injustices that society or culture loves to hide so well, and and that's either by oppressing voices or quite literally covering up our trash in some neighborhood. So I could see how a big part of the work here is the uncovering, right? Because it's almost like this is step one. I saw in your vision on your website, and it kind of had this threefold ness to it. You talk about equity and environment and everyone. I won't read through the whole thing, but I'm curious if we could kind of keep going down this rabbit hole a little bit and unpacking that, and how we landed with those three and how those three are interconnected.
I can jump in if that's all right.
Yeah.
So I think part of where the conversation comes from is trying to put this complexity into a cohesive goal or set of goals as an organization. And, we could talk about if we need more trees in our area, which has fewer trees, if you overlay an area, a map of our area with a map of redlining, it's one and the same, that where the redlining occurred, then that's where there's fewer trees. Well, if we set about to set the goal of more trees, how would that come about? Well, there's resources in the local government that are being directed to other parts of the city. But why aren't they being directed towards this area of the city and this need? So there's this question that comes up that is obscured from all of us a lot of the time. And so when we talk about that institutional transparency and the equity, it's bringing to light why local resources are going to a wealthier part of KCK. But then it also, we want for our actions to be equitable as well, to have a long-term positive impact. So something as simple as planting trees also makes our area better for us, and it also makes it more desirable for other people who are looking for somewhere to live or who are looking for a land to make a profit off of. And so when we are fighting for environment and equity together, that's why, we want more trees in our neighborhood, as one small, environmental improvement. But it also means that we are avidly advocating for equitable consideration and control over decisions related to the land. Because if we got, millions of dollars from foundations to plant, 100,000 trees in our area, then we would continue and see an increased amount of people being displaced from their homes. And so we have to go about it in a way that also simultaneously advocates for people to be able to stay in their homes. So one example of how that equity and housing piece comes in is that the unified government or local government has had an aggressive policy of knocking down homes that could have been rehabilitated, and devaluing the properties of the neighborhoods by doing that. Then simultaneously, if somebody gets behind on their taxes, then they will take their home. They'll steal that person's home and land from them, even if they're only behind by like $600. And so they continually are stealing land, and now are like one of the major landholders in Northeast KCK is the local government, and they're sitting on this land. So how can we advocate for equitable economic development? As Miss Elnora always says, if we're working to improve our own environment, our own quality of life, and at the same time, the local government is taking the home of an elderly person on fixed income who needs help repairing their house or is on disability, but the local government is incentivized to take that land until they find somebody that has a lot of money to sell it to.
I think it's the term equity is a very Christian term. I think it's important to point out that we don't want for people who are in so-called wealthier neighborhoods to go without. We just don't want to be left out. We don't want to be put down, have worse conditions and situations for our families and children and communities. And so I think it's super important to say that equity means that we just want our fair share, what we deserve, or what should come to our communities, just in good faith.
Hello. Yeah, definitely. What I really appreciate about your work is that it is digging, we're digging here at the real roots of the issues surrounding injustice in a place. And you're sort of flying at a certain altitude where you recognize that it's not just this one problem over here, but there are a myriad of issues when it comes to revitalizing a place and embodying justice in a place. And there's this a further common denominator here is that all of this happens on Earth. And and you mentioned equity is a particularly Christian thing to talk about. So I'm curious if you'd be willing to share a little bit more about that and how you see the dash lights coming on for you as a Christian, as a minister in particular, and how you connect these justice issues as a Christian.
You used the word earlier. You used the word gargantuan, and that's how it feels, because they have all good resources. So that's really the fight, is that they have all of these resources that everyone on the planet has contributed to. historically and currently, and everyone on the planet has a right to it. God gave us all dominion. And dominion doesn't mean that one group of people have power over everything, or even that human beings have power over everything. When God uses the term dominion, he means that this person or these people that he put on the planet were supposed to share it. We're supposed to take care of the animals, take care of the air, take care of the oceans, not dominate the planet, dominate the oceans, dominate the air. And so I think people just have a distorted view of what a dominion is. And I think when I just having said that, it made me think of, I think I've heard one of the far right groups is called Dominion. And they also tout themselves to be very Christian because they're thinking of dominion as there is a dominant race, a powerful race that should have power to do what it wants to over other people. And I think that our local governments and our government in general in the United States is kind of based on that concept. But now we're at a place where a lot of people have more knowledge and information than they ever had before. And so we're able to define for ourselves what dominion is, what equity is, what justice is. And it only makes sense that people want what's good for themselves. But for me, it's all about the kids. It's all about, I have been to many oceans. I have swam in many oceans. It's the most incredible thing in the world. I've been to other continents and places. And to think that the children coming behind me may not be able to swim in the ocean, put on goggles and see the colors of a fish and coral. It's just incredible to me. So, you know what they say, charity starts at home. So in our own community, we start trying to clean and take care of. We have to court against this gargantuan opposer who has all of the resources. And we got to wrestle them away from them and say, hey, people live here. People breathe here. People have children that go to school here. So that's what I mean.
Yeah. So good. Yeah, I think about this work like this. You could take that and nail that to the door of our churches, couldn't you? Because it's like this is the work, I believe, of the people of God, and I think Scripture backs that up. That if there are people who are being dominated, we find that our God is typically, quote unquote, in their corner. I think the temptation maybe is to hear a conversation like this, and maybe these are things you've never thought of or you have thought of before. But the temptation is to hear these kinds of conversations and think that we're just demonizing certain groups of people or certain things or certain ways, rather than what the work of the people of God, the work of the kingdom of God has always been up to, which is this rub that is always going to happen when God's people are in a place that is not yet heaven, if that makes sense, right? It's what happens when the people of God live in Roman occupied territories, or Babylon or Egypt, or so this is sort of the ongoing trajectory story of us living further and further and further into God's kingdom, and God's kingdom coming further and further and further, setting up on earth, right? And until I think that's the beauty of this sort of narrative that you're sort of bringing to the surface here for us, is that this is real work for real people's lives. And I think if you live in a place where you don't see any of this, one, maybe look harder. Maybe you don't want to see it. I think there's a whole series of questions that we should be asking ourselves here. Yeah. Anyway, I realize I'm about to preach or something, but I think
Trying to hold myself.
say again.
I just want to. I say I'm trying to hold back.
No, please go.
I just want to say these two things, and then I will let someone else speak, of course. So, the 10 Commandments are the words that God says, God self. And then the rest of much of the Bible, where we get all these opportunities to decide whether or not people are people, they come from other, different writers. Of course, the whole Bible is inspired by God, they said. But we know for a fact the 10 Commandments are the words of God himself. And so God says, love God first and love your neighbor like you love yourself. And on these two hang all the other laws and prophets. In other words, if you get these two right, you love God and love yourself and love people like you love yourself, then everything else goes. Don't kill, don't steal, don't covet. They're automatic if you just do these two. Love God, love yourself, love your neighbor like you love yourself. And it doesn't say, unless they're Latinos crossing the border, unless they're Black folk, unless they're gay, unless they're trans. It doesn't say that. It says to love your neighbor, love people like you love yourself. And God is the righteous judge, the only one who is the only uncreated being who can say whether or not a person is deserving or not deserving of anything. And I'm leaving you all in charge because I'm trusting that you're going to love one another. You're going to love this planet I created and the animals I put on it and the water and the air. I'm expecting you to care for it, not destroy each other. So that's my 2 pieces about that. Done preaching.
It's so
You'll be quiet the rest of the time.
I like you. Yeah. I want to give you a big hug right now through this screen. Yeah, this is, man, yes. I think the reason why this work is so potent is because, again, you're recognizing that the reconciliation of one thing involves the reconciliation of another thing. And I think often we try to, again, to use the word, like we segregate. And, I think about Colossians 1:20, right? And or Paul writes about Christ, and it's about the reconciliation work, is about the reconciliation of all things. Because I wonder if there is such a thing about that this over here could be reconciled without also this also coming with it, because anything short of that is not reconciliation. And and it's like, if we have one job here, I guess it is to love, and anything beyond that is not really our job, quote unquote. Exactly. I don't like using the word job, but yeah.
Because God is love. And their whole work that they fought against was heresy. People who wanted to make little tweaks to the word of God. They wanted to tweak it here, tweak it there. And that's what Paul and the other apostles are fighting for throughout the entire New Testament. No, he didn't say that. This is what he said. This is what he meant. This is what he said.
Yeah.
And so that's what we're fighting against today, is all these heresies, people tweaking it here and making it say what they wanted to say there and be what they wanted to be here, instead of what he actually said, which is love God, love yourself, love your neighbor like you love yourself. And on these hang all the other laws.
I think I need to have a follow. We need to have a follow-up here. Yes. So before we run out of time, I want to make sure that we, pun intended, we ground the work of what you guys are up to. Stacy, did I see that you kind of work with the Green Team Project? Is that right? What
I used to be co-coordinator with the Green Team. I've actually learned to earn now.
Okay.
So the Green Team, though, for the record, is a young adult group, 17 to 21. And they do some incredible outdoor projects. Right now, they're working on floodplains and actually literally helping to design and putting their backs into taking away what is basically had been a concrete thing along the creek called Jersey Creek. And because of the concrete, it's easy to flow. And so they've been doing designs and putting in more plants and trees of that nature. They recently got back from a national park, helping to build homes for eagles and bridges and things like that. So that's what the Green Team does. I work with Learn to Earn now, which is a younger group of children, 11 to 15, which is, I'm hoping, going to be a feeder group for the Green Team, where we're trying to catch them early, teaching them about climate change and conservation, business skills and all, mental health and physical health, high blood pressure, diabetes. We're just trying to get them into the full knowledge of what a healthy human being looks and feels like. If they're not feeling healthy in any aspect of the word, mental, physical, emotional, future, what they're going to be when they grow up, we're just kind of helping them to have good skills. And then if they need help, where to find that help.
Wow.
And of course, climate change and conservation, so that we can feed them into the Green Team.
Okay.
Keeping the planet safer and cleaner.
Those connections are really good. I don't think, particularly living in Kansas City, it doesn't, when I think of areas where people live who might be a little bit more aware of the need to be climate resilient, I don't necessarily think of folks in Kansas City. And that's why I think that it's really great that you guys are having these conversations and on a very practical level and thinking about our children, working with our children, because man, we have to be doing that. And it is our children who are reaping and will reap the environmental consequences and choices that we're making today. Adri, I feel like you might have something to add there. I'd love to hear more about if there are some other programs or projects that you guys are involved in that you'd like to highlight to sort of help our listeners understand what you guys do.
One of the projects that it kind of intersects with what Reverend Stacy was describing, the Green Team is working on improving the watershed infrastructure for the specific park. We have a group of, I think it's like 30 folks who are regularly involved in the community who are advocating for the improved sewer system, because when it floods, which with climate change, there'll be, predicted to be increased flooding and more intense flooding events. Our old sewer system backs up with sewage into people's homes, and it also overflows sewage into Jersey Creek. And so the local government is, been mandated by the EPA to improve that sewer system. But they don't seem to have the fire in their bellies to get it done. And so as a community, we're teaching ourselves about combined sewer overflow systems and all of these, more technical aspects of infrastructure that we need improved in our community so that we can push for the local government to do it better and faster and get more federal funds to do it. And so from those efforts of us informing ourselves about the impact of climate change and flooding on our community, a group of now 30 residents formed, and their group is called ECO. And so they're pushing against, the public works and working alongside them, to do this work better and with more community engagement. And they're also advocating to our local utility company, because it's, again, these interlocking problems of the local utility company could be more aggressively pursuing federal funding to transition to green energy. And simultaneously, they could leverage that to lower utility rates for us as average residents. But instead, they're not doing either of those things. And as a community, we're suffering from frequent shutoffs of electricity, even for people who have medical devices at home. And a labyrinthine, very unfriendly, customer experience, quote unquote. And they just raised the rates again this year. And so those things just go hand in hand. And so the Echo Group is also advocating with them as well. And I'll also mention, or maybe Miss Elnora, if you want to share about the Northeast Grocers Co-op project.
Sure. Yes. Thank you. Well, that's a labor of love right there. Now, one of the things that for a number of years, I want to say 10 to 15 years, like other urban areas, the Northeast used to have corner stores. There was a store that for this or that. And because it was a walkable community back in the day, one could go and walk to the different stores and get the produce. And then we also had something called I call it the welcome wagon. And that was where people who would grow home goods would actually have a wagon. Some would have the wagon pulled by a horse, if I remember. I'm probably dating myself. And the little tune would be, I got watermelon, I got corn, I got watermelon, I got corn, and go through the streets and whatever, and people would come and purchase. Well, we don't have that anymore for a lot of different reasons. So the grocery store itself, most people are accustomed to and desire to have a large food market like our store, like a Kroger's or A&P or Safeway or something that we all have had in our lives, and we can purchase from a mass merchandiser like that. If we have a car and a Walmart, we could go places. But the Northeast Grocers Co-op, what we're doing in the Northeast, it is a co-op sort. Well, not a sort, but a type of co-op. And what we've done what we're in the process of doing is taking a building that has been compromised by contamination and issues of sewer and that type of thing, and working with the EPA and the Mid-America Regional Council to make it what I've heard called a white box. So it's clean, there's no mold and so forth, and use that as a co-op where people can bring their produce to sell, to buy, as well as to offer a few staples, for the neighborhood. The thing that I particularly like about it is that it allows, in that neighborhood, it allows for an entity to motivate and to entice the youth, especially, to learn the business principles of a grocery store or any market. It kind of goes hand in hand with what Pastor Evans is talking about as far as learn to earn, so that the kids understand how to, the value of supporting local business. And not only the children, but people themselves, so that you start to change the mindset that this is an ownership thing. As well as to provide the food and the sustenance for people in a particular area. So as I was listening to this great conversation and so forth, the amount of individual efforts that are needed to bring back, if you will, a traumatized community. The amount of effort is tremendous, and it's not going to happen overnight. And where that fits in with the principle of Christianity, and I was listening to the great discussion that Pastor Evans had, as well as Adrienne and yourself too, Caleb, I was reflecting upon the fact that what we are experiencing is not new in human history. And has gone on since mankind. There's always been the oppressor and people who have been slaved or enslaved and mistreated. And my gosh, when you think about the history and how easy it was to call someone a heretic and cut off their heads and that type of stuff. the cruelty that humans have one against the other, or whatever it is. Is it greed? Is it money? Is it power? Is it control? These are the things that to me are the big obstacles for revitalizing a traumatized area like the Northeast or anywhere else. Is that Groundwork NRG has the best principles and the best principles in mind, and it's for the common good, and it's for the greater good. In the reality, while we have these types of spiritual, I want to call them spiritual leanings and advocacies, the reality of it is that we have these political systems, and we have these other types of artificial constructs made from that men and women make, and that is that right there is where the conflict ensues. If decisions were made based upon Christian principles, if for example, we had a term like economic development, every time I've asked about economic development, I hear that term, what I see are dollars, brick and mortar, somebody making money, and so forth and so on. I don't see in economic development principles of love and Christianity. Now, is it idealistic for me to think that something like that could exist? Is it naive? I don't know. Maybe that's another discussion to have. And as long as the world turns and goes round and round and round, there are going to be other Northeast the areas. Maybe ours will remain the same. But until we have those fundamentals of love and actually Christianity, true love, that's just what Pastor Evans is talking about, true love, I just am very doubtful that we'll see, at least in my lifetime, anything that's sustainable and really actually cures the trauma that has occurred, that humans have placed one upon the other. Right?
Thank you for sharing that. I think, I hear that, and it's simultaneously like, you can feel the weight of the work, and yet the simplicity and tangibility of the work of loving your neighbor. And so it does feel both gargantuan and yet simplistic in that making that next right decision, that next taking advantage of that next opportunity to love your neighbor, and seeing how heaven breaks in thereafter a little bit more. As we wrap up our conversation today, I love it. You guys are literally embodying this good news in a place, and I'm wondering if there are, we are a little bit all over the place here, but I think appropriately so. But I'm wondering if there are folks listening who are encouraged by your work and curious about your work, and curious about the potential of similar work in their own locale. And if you had a practical nugget or something that you might encourage listeners to maybe take a next step on.
One, I'll pass along, something that another person had told me, advice, which is to learn about the history of the indigenous people in your area and the indigenous present, right? Not just the history, but who is still there now, and to build relationships with the land by going and being outside and spending time physically and spiritually outside, and also to connect with the people of that land, and to just get to know people, not in a transactional way, but to start there by learning about the people of the land, and then growing in a sincere relationship, not a transactional relationship from there.
Yeah, I would agree something very similar. I taught preaching for 17 years, and I also taught language arts. And one skill I like to teach young people is to hear the author. A lot of times we were writing papers, and their first draft of their paper, it would be off the top of their heads and what they thought and what they wanted to say. And I'd say, well, did you read the book? And they'd have to eventually admit that they had not. I'd say, I want you to go back. I want you to read the book. I want you to hear the author. And then I want you to write a paper that shows me that you comprehended what you read, that you heard what the person said. And you can have an intelligent conversation with them in your paper. So that's my advice to everybody. Hear what the other side is saying, hear the author, and then try to have a fair, equitable conversation.
Well, thank you guys so much for taking some time and talking with us and just sharing the beautiful and rooted and fruiting work that you guys are up to in Northeast Kansas City, Kansas.
Thank you, Aaron.
Wow. Friends, I hope you're gleaning as much from that as I am. So good. Thanks for listening. Hit subscribe, download, leave a review, give a star, help us get this thing moving, and let's work together as we pray for God's will to be done on earth as it is in heaven. See you next time.